Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I'm Catherine Reynolds Lewis here with my colleague Erika Hayasaki and a wonderful conversation with Latoya Abulu, an editor at Mongabay, which covers Indigenous communities and the environment. Erika, what stood out for you from this interview?
Latoya seems like a wonderful editor to work with. What really stood out for me is that she is looking for pitches from the US, from areas like California and beyond. She gets a lot of pitches from all over the world. She works with freelancers from all over the world. And also, it's really important to her that when you're pitching her, you are pitching stories that show you have a knowledge of Indigenous communities, that you have real grounding in communities, and you're not just parachuting in as a reporter out of nowhere. And so she takes those pitches pretty seriously. So it was a wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, so she had wonderful advice and very specific tips. So hope that the audience enjoys it as much as I and you enjoyed listening to it.
Okay, hello. Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. We're so grateful to have you. Hi, Latoya. I'm so
Hello.
glad we're talking today. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you and this podcast. Um, I am part of the Institute for Independent Journalists, and I am a journalist as well, based in Southern California. And the mission of the Institute is the financial and emotional sustainability of freelancers of color. So we're so glad to have you here and to talk to you about your work, Latoya. So Latoya Abulu is an editor who leads Mongabay's Indigenous news desk. Latoya is an award-winning journalist specializing in global stories about Indigenous affairs, human rights, and nature-based solutions. In 2024, she worked on a joint investigation uncovering Indigenous rights abuses in the Democratic Republic of Congo and is currently working on a mapping project of isolated people's lands. Her work has been featured in The Diplomat, Asia Times, Japan Times, Earth Island Journal, The Ecologist, and others. So welcome, Latoya. Thanks for being here. I know you mentioned you're in the woods. Can you tell everybody where you're speaking to us from at the moment?
It's a small village called the Pitfalls, about 2 hours north of Montreal in the Laurentides. Beautiful area, mountainous, full of forests, pine trees, lakes. Yeah, I love
I
this
was,
place.
I was there doing this interview in person. Well, I just want to start by asking you about your career journey. It's always interesting to find out how people got into journalism and particularly editing as well. So maybe you could start with how you got into this line of work and how you got to where you are now as an editor.
Well, it's been quite a convoluted journey. I started out working within the humanitarian sector and environmental organizations as well. So I started within NGOs, working abroad in different countries, and that could be for agroecology NGOs, climate justice NGOs as well. So I worked in Nicaragua and I've worked in China as well. I've worked within the NGO sector. And at the same time, I had a love for writing. I'm a huge bookworm, and I wanted to really mold that with my social justice, environmental interests as well. And so I started doing freelance work. So I started as a freelance journalist myself. So I was doing reporting on human rights issues and environmental crimes, mostly in Asia. That's kind of why you see, I wrote for Japan Times and Asia Times because it was really focused there at first. And then over time, I took the leap and I actually started working as an editor for an arts journal. And I really enjoyed my time there. And I really get to explore and mold my journalism interests. And then I worked with UN agencies. So it's a very big, convoluted journey, but I was always had writing on the side. And then I eventually came to Mongabay. And I came as an editor, and I'm leading now the Indigenous news desk. So I have a lot of experience on human rights issues from my work with NGOs and the UN. And then I also was a freelance journalist myself.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, so many journals have similar stories, just going from
Yeah.
place and figuring their way into it. You mentioned that you worked for NGOs and you freelanced. How do you sort of see yourself as a journalist in this broader landscape now, in this media world, or your role in journalism now?
I see my role as a messenger, and I think that especially these past few years, the media landscape has changed and shifted. It is much more difficult, I feel like, to be a journalist. There's
Yeah,
a mental health toll, but there's also the audience, I think, and their relationship with media is changing as well. It's difficult to get spots. It's difficult to get your pitches accepted. It's
yeah,
very cutthroat. It's very competitive. It's difficult to sometimes survive on a freelance budget or just on payments for what you get as a freelancer journalist. So I think that the media landscape has changed. And I think for me as a journalist right now, I see myself as someone who's part of a larger goal, especially at Mongabay, to hold on to the foundational principles of journalism to keep it alive, to keep that kind of fifth estate alive
mhm,
of accuracy, promoting accuracy, factual information. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. So having to really keep the trust the audience has in you. So I really see my role right now as a journalist to keep the fifth estate alive in a really kind of difficult landscape.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, that's such an important role, and I'm curious to learn more about Mongabay as well. Maybe you could tell us about the publication for those who aren't familiar, and then and what you oversee in particular there.
Yeah, so Mongabay is a leading environmental science news site. We get a lot of readers because Mongabay has built trust, especially for policymakers and conservationists. When I was working in NGOs, I was reading Mongabay because a lot of policy that NGOs do, especially in the environmental sector, is they read Mongabay and they rely on what Mongabay provides, the news that it provides. And my role right now in the organization is as an editor. So I lead the Indigenous news desk. This is a global desk, so we cover Indigenous peoples all around the world. And we publish in 7 languages, and we've worked so far since Mongabay has started with 1,000 freelance journalists. So we really rely on freelance journalists around the world for our news because we rely on these are our local journalists, right? So we rely on people being able to be close to the areas they're reporting on, to be able to speak with the communities that they're reporting on. So it's really, I think, a backbone for Mongabay.
Yeah, that's amazing. 1,000 journalists worldwide. And I'm also would love to know, and for anybody who is interested in working with you, what might be the kind of story that you're looking for? What might be the kind of pitch that you take and really pay attention to?
Well, I think that just the basics, because of my desk area of focus, it has to include Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
We also include traditional communities as well and Afro-descendant communities. So I do accept pitches on those communities as well. There has to be a juxtaposition with environmental issues that can be biodiversity conservation, that can be a climate issue, climate adaptation, that can be, communities dealing with rising sea levels. There has to be that kind of environmental juxtaposition because of the nature of what Mongabay is. And then in terms of specific pitches, at the moment, I'm looking for pitches that really are underreported
Mhm.
issues, and that's really one of the strengths that Mongabay provides as a news outlet is that we really focus on the underreported stories in communities around the world. Um, Things that are unique as well. And at the moment, just given what's happening in the world, like we were talking earlier, there's a lot going on. I'm really focused on mining for the energy transition as well. So a lot of communities, Indigenous communities, are feeling the impacts of mining for the energy transition. So I'm looking into those stories at the moment.
Yeah, and you take stories everywhere from news stories to video to photo, or can you talk a little bit about that process too?
Yeah, so I don't know if I did say this, but I do accept global stories. So I work uh, in three languages at the moment, but the stories that I publish are in English and in French. So
Mhm.
in terms of the sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, like you take photos, videos, all of that, all of the above, I guess, in addition to writing.
Yeah, well, I'm focused on print.
Yeah.
So I accept articles and I accept op-eds and I accept photo essays as well. So I edit those. For
Yeah.
video, we have a video team that's dedicated to that. So sometimes I will receive a pitch for video and I'll just forward it to the video team. Sometimes I receive pitches from multimedia journalists who have a great story and then have an amazing picture and video. And I'm like, okay, I'll accept the package. You work with me for the pictures and for the article, but you're gonna work with the video editors for the video.
Got
So this also we have podcasts as well. So there are times like I'll work with a freelance journalist. I'll send her somewhere in Ecuador, for example, to do a great story, and we'll want her to speak on the podcast on as well. So she will do, the article, but then she can also go and speak on the podcast about what she saw and experienced there.
Wow. And you have your own team as well as overseeing freelancers?
Yes, yes. So the Indigenous News Desk, I do have my own team of staff reporters that I work with, but I work with staff reporters across the global team.
Hmm.
At Mongabay, we have 6 bureaus, so I work out with the global bureau reporters.
Hmm.
And I do work with freelance journalists as well. So at the moment, since I started working at Mongabay in 2021, I've worked with about 80 freelance journalists. I regularly work with 20 though at the moment, who I really, really trust, but I always take on more because there might be a story, for example, in a small community in Ethiopia, and I get a really great freelance journalist who pitches me the story, and I'll take it on.
Yeah. I'm curious about the ones that you have built trust with and how, writers begin to develop that trust with you. I'm sure it starts with a pitch and probably just proving themselves to a certain degree, but can you talk a little bit about that trust building process between writers that you want to keep working with who are freelancers?
I think that there's three important pillars for trust when it comes to working with freelancers. The most important one is the information that's provided in the draft, right? So, is the information that's provided come from in-depth research? Is it accurate? Do I
Hmm.
feel like you're inventing things sometimes or just wanting to create a convenient narrative? Like that has happened where,
Yeah.
when you're an editor and you're fact checking information or you're speaking with other people that you have contacts with on the ground and it doesn't line up with the draft. So that's the really first pillar of trust is, being able to provide factual, reliable information in your draft and being honest with your editor when you just don't know something or if an angle is just not panning out the way you think it was going to be. The
Yeah.
second most important thing for like I guess a reliable for a trustworthy relationship with a contributor and just knowing if someone is reliable is handing in the drafts and on time.
Yeah.
And if there's a delay, it happens. I have had to hand in drafts late too, but just being able to have that communication with an editor because of how our workload is and how deadlines are for us as
Yeah.
well. So being able to communicate and be just reliable in your communication when you're going to hand in a draft late. And a third pillar I would say as well is just professionalism. I think that a lot of the freelance journalists that I have worked with, and I've been very fortunate, have treated their freelance work with care as if it's an actual career. And I know that, when you're a freelance journalist, you're not on someone's pay stub. You have that kind of flexibility, but I do think it's also important to still be professional when you're dealing with an editor or with a news organization. And there are many great freelance journalists that I've worked with who are very professional and they treat their work with, the utmost care and seriousness. And that's really great for a good relationship.
Absolutely. I love that you are also taking, pitches from people who are within the communities and are really, there on the ground. And
Hmm.
I'm, I would love to know a little bit about how somebody can also demonstrate their cultural competency in reporting. You know, are there red flags for you, in these pitches sometimes, or green flags, even, where you really can understand, okay, here's, there's a difference between maybe somebody who's just completely an outsider coming in or somebody who has a little more grounded in what's happening? Or does that, how does that play into how you take pitches too?
It does. It does. I think that as many editors, I've read so many pitches that sometimes looking at reading, sorry, 5 seconds in, if if you're going to take it or not.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to read it completely, you get to take your time with it, but you get a gut feeling just because you've been through this so many times. And sometimes I've been to the communities that they're reporting on, and I can just tell when something's off. I can give an example of like a very typical red flag that would happen. Is I work on the Indigenous news desk, and so I get a lot of Indigenous pitches on
Right.
Indigenous issues or on Indigenous communities. And
Right.
there is one of the most common red flags is a romanticization of Indigenous peoples or the treatments of, let's say, a quote unquote noble savage. And this is something that you often see with outsiders who are not familiar with the communities, who are just jumping in, and they
Mhm.
have an already preconceived image of what an Indigenous person is supposed to be, and then how this community is supposed to be. And it's often founded on sometimes underlying racist conceptions of people, of these communities that lacks complexity. So this is a very common red flag I will see sometimes when I'm having a pitch, is that there'll be a community that's being romanticized, and then it'll be followed up with, the fact that they don't have enough sources in these communities anyways. So it's like you
Yeah.
can't even verify the angle, and you don't have a connection to people in this community. And I'm very nervous and reluctant to accept pitches when they don't have any connections to people in the community, because this means that an outsider will be coming into this community,
Yes.
asking a bunch of questions, especially with Mongabay's name attached to it. I don't know how they're going to react. I don't know how they're going to be. I don't know if they're going to be respectful. So that is the red flag, is like the romanticization and the lack of connection to communities, and that's a demonstration of just also reporter just not being familiar reporting on Indigenous issues. And then
Yeah.
green flags, on the other hand, will be
Yeah.
having already established sources in that community, like you being able to say, like, being able to write, sorry, that, I know this person and that person in the community, they've already said this. You're able to even pop in a quote already in the pitch because you've spoken with these people. So you're able to also, it shows that you're able to verify your angle as
Yeah.
well. And it's really important. So there's already kind of a reporting plan a bit in place even before you started reporting. So and I think another really important green flag as well, and this is the opposite of the romanticization, is the fact that you're able to show complexity in your angle. Sometimes
Sure.
there are short stories that, they deserve a very straightforward angle, but Mongabay likes to delve into nuance and in-depth reporting, and then that comes with just the reality that our world is complex. Communities and issues are complex, and if you're able to show that you know this in your pitch, that's a really good green flag. It shows that you know what's going on and you know the reality of the world.
Yeah. That's great advice on both sides. Thank you
Hmm.
for giving that. Um, Also, since you work with so many freelancers, can you talk about the pay issue and how what your rates are, I guess, and I don't know, is there pay for travel, reporting in the field? How does that work?
Yeah, so Mongabay does pay for travel. So we'll give a travel reimbursement, or we will give a travel advance,
Mhm.
depending on just the contributor's financial situation. So sometimes they can pay it up front and then we will reimburse, or sometimes they can't and we'll give it in advance. When we do give an advance, is we have already established a relationship of trust with the contributor to be able to be like, okay, we can trust you that we're going to give you this much money, and then you're going to actually go and travel and then come back with a draft.
Yeah.
Um, and so we do reimburse and we do advances, especially because a lot of our reporting relies on field reporting, especially in our news desk. We
Yeah.
have to, I require 80% of the time you have to get the communities, like you have to get primary sources from the communities. So you have to go there.
Yeah.
And then in terms of pay, yes, we do pay. So our rates at the moment fluctuate. So they go from as low as 40 cents a word up to like $1, $1.10. And this
Mhm.
depends on the contributor. So how long they've been working with Mongabay, the strength of their drafts, if they're going to do field reporting. So field reporting will bump up your rate, per word rate, because you have to do the extra legwork. It also depends on how much research a draft requires. So if you have to do a lot of research for like an in-depth piece about, I don't know, some geoengineering new invention or something, then that'll also bump up the rate. So that is um the range. I will say that I give 50 cents, 60 cents a word, 50 cents to 70 cents a word. I do have, of course, contributors who I work with who I pay $1 a word
Mhm.
with. Mhm.
Yeah, and it's good to know that the advanced part is really interesting. I don't think a lot of publications they don't always do that, but recognizing how important that field work is, in particular to your beat too. Like
Mhm.
it's not always phoned in research in your world, and that's important that you support that too.
It can't be, right?
Yeah,
There's many instances where especially when it comes to Indigenous peoples and these communities, you have to build a relationship of trust. And phoning in
absolutely. Yeah.
and getting an answer is just not the
Not gonna
reality for a
cut
lot of places.
it. Yeah, the trust building on the ground, with your own expertise, building that cultural sensitivity, and then building the trust with your editor. All of that is essential, and that sometimes takes time to get through to have that relationship with the editor. But it sounds like people certainly do. And um, maybe you could give a couple of examples of stories that have worked really well for you or that you're really proud of, that are kind of models for the kinds of stories that writers who want to pitch you could be thinking about or studying if they want to, get on your radar.
Um, of course, I have many.
Yeah.
I think in quite a few examples from freelance journalists. I think the first one that comes to mind is actually a story that we hired the freelance journalist after.
Oh, wow.
And it is a common, I guess, a thread for Mongabay is that Mongabay likes to hire staff reporters who is already worked with as trusted contributors. So once you do build that relationship of trust with your editor, and a job opening comes up, people who've already freelanced for Mongabay are more likely to get accepted.
Yeah.
So as the example I was speaking about, it was investigation on a mining company in the DRC, which was mining on community forestry concessions. And we were able to prove this with maps and on the ground reporting with the communities. Um, and it was a really great investigation. This journalist, who's a Congolese journalist, he's the one who got hired after this. He's really been really reliable and he's really great at maintaining a strong network of sources in his country. And being able to maintain a strong network of sources, civil society organizations, NGOs, local communities, lawyers, that is really, I guess, it's a superpower for any freelance journalist. And it was really helpful for that investigation. And so there's that one. Another really great example is a story in Peru, and it was an Indigenous women's cooperative, which was involved in wildcat conservation.
Mm.
And it started off as like a fun women's gathering where the women gathered together, but then it merged into actually a conservation organization with a conservation focus. And the women got really involved and they helped shift their community's view on conserving wildcats, some of which were endangered. And
Mhm.
this was done by a freelance reporter, and it led to a lot of impacts actually. So because of this story, the Women's Cooperative got extra funding. They got from organizations. They got renewed funding as well. And they got organizations that wanted to help them with some of other initiatives on the side. So that's another really great example.
Yeah.
I feel like of freelance reporting. We have a bunch. Like there's another one where a journalist, he got a grant that we supported him with
Hmm.
from the International Fund for Journalists. They had like a health innovation call, and he went to Panama and he did two great stories on indigenous traditional knowledge on medicinal plants. So
Mm.
one was about female midwives who were using traditional plants in midwifery, and then another one was about the community coming together to try to revive knowledge, and they're creating a whole pharmaceutical book with their knowledge. And then that also got great impacts as well. But yeah.
No, those sound amazing. You mentioned that you have people all over the world and you have people you trust. Are there areas that are undercovered that you would love to find, reporters who could cover it with this kind of depth? Or I think you even have a project in California. I'd love to hear about that because I'm in California, but maybe
Yeah.
areas where you would love to have more coverage. So maybe if there's freelancers out there, they could think about pitching you as well.
Yeah, I right now it's the States and Canada, honestly.
Okay.
Mongabay is international. We do cover the States and Canada, but because Mongabay started off as really rainforest focused, a lot of our contributors and coverage is focused on Latin Americas, the Amazon, or Central Africa, where the Congo Basin is, and then also like the Mekong area in South Asia. So we have a lot of coverage in the tropics
Mm,
and freelancers in the tropics. But in Canada and the States, it's quite low, honestly. And
yeah.
that's where I would like to get and work with more freelance reporters
Mhm.
and do more coverage there. We do have a California project that opened this year, and it's
Mhm.
the California Biodiversity Project. So covering, it's really biodiversity focused, but
Mm,
that can also include, what Indigenous communities are doing to also conserve biodiversity in California.
got it. Got it. When freelancers email you cold, for example, and say that hey, I feel like I am in this region, I could pitch you some stories. What is the best way besides having, a strong pitch, really working on your pitch to get you to open it? I'm sure you get a lot. How many pitches do you get, by the way? I'm imagining it with every editor, it's a lot.
I get a lot of pitches. I'm right now behind on my pitches. I think every editor is behind
Exactly.
on their
Exactly.
pitches. I would say I maybe look through maybe 40 pitches a week. And that for me feels like a lot because I don't just simply react to pitches. I also create my own pitches and give them to reporters or freelance journalists as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, to get me to open an email, I think is the subject line, like how timely really the pitch is, and to
Yeah.
really indicate if it's something that's urgent. And even if you don't indicate it in a subject line, I will open a pitch before I answer it and kind of leave it there for a few days until I have the time to actually delve into it. But the first couple of sentences are very important to communicate urgency.
Mm,
Because the reality of an editor is the fact that you can't react to everything at the same time right away, and you can't react to everything at the same time because you have another 10 pitches to look at. So we have to prioritize what's most important. So I think that communicating that is really important in your pitches.
absolutely. Is there a day of the week? Like, are you looking at all the pitches on a Friday or like
I wish
yeah.
I wish I could organize it like that, but just with the way my work falls, it's just any time slot I have time to look at something, I will look at. I'll look at it.
And I would imagine that since you're working in news, you don't want it to be terribly long. Like you don't want somebody to have written the whole story yet and you don't have time.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Um, so length doesn't matter. Among maybe
Yeah.
publish quite long features. I think the average article that I work on is about 1,400 words, and
Yeah.
I publish things that are 2,400 words as well. But it is not a good idea to send an article that's already been written.
Yes.
I am much more likely to reject those because the editor didn't have the say in crafting the angle and the focus
Yes.
of the article. And it also just takes a lot of time sometimes to come to an agreement because sometimes the freelance reporter, just with their own reason, can be more reluctant to accept changes because they've already written the entire article.
For
But
sure.
it makes it more difficult to come to collaborate together.
Yeah.
to come to something that you both agree with. And yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like also you work with reporters who get grants. Are you ever like sort of signing on in the beginning, like I will support a grant too, or support your application for a grant just so that the grant might know that they have an editor involved, or how do you facilitate that kind of relationship
Mhm.
with reporters who might need to, so, apply for these grants?
I support them all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
I never said no to somebody, and I write letters of support very often.
Yeah.
Um, the Mongabay, we do provide some financial support already for travel, and we freelance reporters often like they're happy with the payment that they get for an article.
Sure.
But when there are projects that require a lot of money to travel, but sometimes international travel too, we tend
Yeah.
to um, work with people who have to do domestic travel because they're already in the area. But sometimes you need a grant, and every time that I've been asked to provide a letter of support, I've done it. I've frequently worked with journalists who receive grants from the Rainforest Investigation Network.
Yeah.
Like I just said right now, the International Center uh, for Journalists as
Mhm.
well. There are European grants, there's grants in Africa. So I'm very, very supportive of grants, and I often write letters.
That's amazing. Um, the editing process. So you're working with stories that are sometimes 1,500 words over 2,000 words. You're reading through at least 40 pitches a week, although you might be getting even more than that. You're also writing letters for people, supporting. So then how do writers, what should they expect when they're being edited? Like, what is the process like from pitch to publication? How
Mhm.
does it depend on the story and how they work?
I think it does depend on the story, but I can just briefly say what the process looks like. If I
Um,
get a pitch and I do accept it, I will ask a few questions I ask questions to see how much they understand what they're actually pitching me. Sometimes I'll know the answer, but I want to see and kind of like test to see, do you know what is going on in this area and like what's the depth of your knowledge here? And then that will help me craft the angle. And then I send them an assignment list once we come to an agreement, and that includes all the details we agreed with, the angle, the key points, the sources you're going to speak with, the word count, payment, everything is there. We agreed to that. There are two contributor forms that they do sign. One of the forms has to do with just collecting information, banking information, who they are, identity. And then the other form is a contract. So like, what does it look like if you're going to work with Mongabay? What does it look like if what are the liabilities? What are the risks? Or what are your payments, when you're going to receive your payment, etc. as a contract.
mhm.
And then they get to start writing. I'm very flexible with deadlines. Mongabay in general, we're very flexible with deadlines because we're not a fast-paced news organization. We don't really deal with breaking news as our core focus.
Yeah.
Um, Once I get the draft, I edit it. The editing time, it depends. I think I edit, I hope I edit fast enough for some reporters. Um, but I edit it within 3 days to a week. I'll have the draft edited. Depending on how heavy the edits are, um, it can last, it can go through two drafts or it can go up to eight. Sometimes it does go up to eight for many different reasons.
Yeah.
And then the article does go through copy editing,
Hmm.
and then it gets published.
Hmm.
Um, I think a really important thing to mention, though, is that Mongabay is very serious about accurate reporting.
Hmm.
And we do have an important fact-checking process while the piece is being edited.
Yeah.
We do ask the reporters to keep all of their notes, all of their recordings, screenshots of their emails so that we can verify information and the quotes.
Hmm.
And we do have a fact-checking process for all the facts and information. So as I'm editing, I have to check through everything. So that's kind of one of the reasons why sometimes it can take long. And then there's a copy editing process after that will do another layer of fact checking. If the
Got it.
story is very can come with legal implications because there's a company that's involved that's taking part in human rights abuses. So there's risks for the reporter and for Mongabay if something is inaccurate here. we have a safety committee that will also read through drafts just to make sure that there is a um, to reduce the risk if there's any kind of factual issues. And we do
Mhm.
have fact checkers on top of all of this who are involved. So just to make sure that everything is like clean, clean, clean. Um,
Yes. So many layers
mhm.
of editing that you have to go through and the traditional kind of fact checking process. So save everything, put
Mhm.
it in a Google Drive, make it easy for
Exactly.
you to find.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What about just rights issues? And is it like a work for hire contract generally, or is there negotiation in that? And also just in terms of maybe somebody is writing a book on their community and they are also reporting on it. Do they retain rights if they, you know, have a story that might end up being something more later? How does that work?
So do you mean that if they're using a book they've written, for example, and they're using that as inspiration for an article, or vice versa?
Uh, I guess it would be probably maybe they're in the community already and they're reporting on a community. I'm thinking of there's a great book called Brothers on Three or something, Three Brothers. I'm messing that up. I'll put it in the show notes. But I think it
Mhm.
started as an article and was expanded into a book. It was on an Indigenous community and I think a basketball team.
Yeah.
But you never know where it goes. I'm just curious, like about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I understand. Yeah, so of course they retain the rights to the work. It's also when articles are put on Mongabay, it's Creative Commons as well. So anyone can republish the article as well from as long as the reporter, the freelance reporter is being credited, Mongabay is being credited, and is a link to the original article. So it's out there for anyone to use. The reporter as well retains rights to their article, so they can use it and reuse it for any other way that they want to. They can
Yeah.
have a book about it. The reason why it's also set up like this at Mongabay is because we know we're not trying to steal your article or just trying to have exclusive rights to it. It's Mongabay is really focused on sharing information due to the planetary crisis that we have. Like it's not really based on trying to retain exclusive rights to work as part of a money-making machine. It's really
Yes.
focused on sharing information as much as possible. Your article will be translated as well, right? Because we work in 7 languages.
Yes.
So we will have other bureaus who will take your article, translate it so that other communities can read it and have access to it. So as long as you can use and share the article information, anyone can.
Good to know. Good to know.
Mhm.
You have been a freelancer and you've done this incredible work, um, I mentioned at the beginning of the show investigating Indigenous rights abuses in the Democratic Republic of Congo and many more, your mapping projects and things like that. Do you have advice for reporters when it comes to doing these kind of more complicated stories, or particularly around the interviewing process, getting people to trust you, to open up, to tell their stories. Like, how did you learn to do that yourself as a journalist, and how would you give advice to those who are starting that journey themselves?
I would say what didn't happen overnight. I had to, it takes time to build skills, and I had to learn to be patient with myself because I can be quite hard on myself or kind of a perfectionist. I wanted to like do big stories overnight, and I had to learn that it takes time to build relationships with people that trust you. And that's really a core part of journalism is building trusting relationships with people, and it's not always it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be transactional relationships as well. Like I generally have a lot of care for a lot of the communities and the people, and the institutions and anyone actually from any side of the aisle, like who I'm speaking with, because we're speaking with humans and we're trying to share information. So it takes time to build relationships, and it also takes time to build your skills. And I think that, I don't come from from a privileged background in any way. I was not raised with a lot of financial resources, but there are a lot of free resources out there that helped me be able to build my skills. Like I watched a lot of YouTube videos on open source intelligence or on geospatial data and learning how to use GIS tools to be able to
Wow.
do these things. And it exists out there. You have to work harder, unfortunately, if you don't have the financial resources to do it.
Yeah.
But I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I have to teach myself. There is QGIS that's free, which is an amazing resource to use, to play around with. And it takes time to build the relationships to actually bring these stories and skills to life.
Yes. Yes. And you, did you go to journalism school? It didn't, I don't, it sounds like you came through a different route, right?
Yeah, I didn't go through journalism school, but I did get a journalism diploma
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah. No, I always say so much learning is the doing of it.
It's
And
a doing with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there are these resources that you can access now and just building those relationships, which is kind of like reporting too. You
hmm
report relationships that will also help you learn along the way.
hmm
Um,
Definitely.
yeah. Any other closing advice just for, I work with a lot of I teach in an undergraduate program of journalism as well. So I'm always
hmm
thinking of, people who want to follow in your footsteps or lessons you learned along the way as you made this transition, or why it's so important to you also to be doing this work in this time. Any last thoughts?
I could say it's always good to be curious. I think curiosity is the best, in my opinion. It's best to always be curious as a journalist. And because you will encounter stories and you'll encounter situations in which you think you already know what the angle is or what the end goal is,
Mhm.
but it will surprise you. And that curiosity to learn more, to hear other points of views, and to hear the other side will really help you become a strong journalist and will really help strengthen your articles as a journalist, and it'll help you in your career further on because you'll be creating really strong stories because you were curious, and you didn't just fall on your own biases,
Yeah,
as well. So I think that that was something that was really important for me to learn. So that even when I'm editing or I'm writing right now, I'm always curious. I'm like, am I perhaps wrong here? And I will verify and I will see another point of view. So I think that that's really important to always be
absolutely.
curious.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much for being with us and telling us about your role and how we can better pitch you and find stories that are good for Mongabay. And I hope that a lot of people do pitch you because
Mhm.
sounds like you would be great to work for.
I also,
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to,
and
but I
thank
hope
you
you
for
don't get
having me.
inundated. You're going to get inundated with even more work. So that's probably.
It's great that I love my job.
Yeah,
That's
you
it.
have to love it. You have to love it to do
Yeah, you have to
it.
love it.
The Freelance Journalism Podcast is a production of the Institute for Independent Journalists. Our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of freelancers of color. Learn more about our work at theiij.com and use the code POD10 for a discount on our annual conference and other events open for registration now. That's POD number 10. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or both. You can find our free webinars and other offerings on YouTube. And your recommendation and sharing with friends is the greatest compliment and helps us discover new listeners. Thanks for listening.